can be really helpful in thinking about yourself and also about yourself vis-a-vis earlier born people than you and later born people. Some of you already can have experience like this. Some of you live a little longer before there will be later born adults. But it's an interesting marker of where you are in your own life when you look around and realize that there are fully adult human beings with your spouses and children and stuff who are a decade or two younger than you, at least. But thinking about whether, say, the difference between you and your parents on any particular issue or any distinct perceptions you're having of the world or life its own self, whether this is actually due to where you are in the life cycle, or whether it's actually due to being members of different cohorts, and it gives you a really different kind of feel for what it means and likelihood of change, and just kind of understanding people from different cohorts is a different kind of layer of understanding what older adults are about. And people do tend to have some sense of both what cohort they identify with and whether they're typical or atypical of their cohort. Because you can't reverse age its own self, when it's appropriate to think of something as more due to cohort, I think people will often see it as being more changeable, and if not changeable, at least less likely to get worse. If something is really age-related, and if it's progressively age-related, you not only know that you've got this problem, you know it's going to continue to get worse. And knowing that that something is a function of your cohort membership means that you might actually be able to change your mind about whether you want to do it. And even if you can't or don't want to change your mind, you know that it's not going to be worse in the future than it is now. So you've got a different kind of even marker of what the changeability, what the meaningfulness of particular things are. Yeah, Felicia?
I was just wondering how cohorts relate to place, because you talk about like a U.S. cohort and this, but then what about different regions, or comparing the certain context in various countries, or just wondering how that's true.
I think certainly at least up to the 70s anyway, I would say there were a lot of regional differences in the U.S. I think in some ways as communication has kind of leveled that out a great deal. And as I've said before, I grew up in the small town South in the middle of the 20th century, and accents were much more strikingly different, for example, in the 50s in the South than they are now. There's still a Southern accent. It hasn't disappeared, but it's not as distinct, and I think a lot of other parts of the country, not having been from there, I may not have as good an ear for it, but there are a lot of places in the country that used to have regional accents in the mid-20th century, but they've largely disappeared. Almost everybody has that sort of, what in the 50s used to be called kind of St. Louis Midwestern accent, was what news broadcasters sort of strove for. Broadcast television, and the fact that it's kind of permeated a lot of American language. Just giving that as like one example. It's a little different than this, but one of the things that I made adjustments for as I first started thinking about cohort stuff is that at least up through the 60s, probably into the 70s a little bit, stuff tended to get to the South about a decade or two later than it got to the coast. And so I would find myself for a lot of issues actually more like my growing up experience would be more like, say, the 50s or even the 40s cohort for people that grew up in metropolitan coastal areas of the United States, and then people who grew up in small towns in the middle of the country would be sort of on this decade or 2 decade lag. I sort of think that probably has smoothed out a great deal since the mid-20th century. But I think, so you could get those kind of variations, certainly at least possible regionally, and certainly could affect, you know, the earlier born people that you all would be working with and writing policies about and studying and so forth after you leave the Davis School. And certainly as you move into different countries and as you work with people who have immigrated from different countries, you have to move carefully and ask them about what the major changes have been and when they occurred and how they see some of these cohort issues. Because I think you could get things that certainly occurred at different times. The boomer phenomena is not quite global, but it does affect a lot of countries around the world, had this kind of upsurge. And in many of them, there's a certain amount of cultural sharing across classes. But not all of them. And I think if you look at, particularly if you look at East Asian countries, post-World War II, where you have a huge shift of from rural to urban, from largely agricultural to industrial, and you have enormous advances in economic prosperity in countries in very short periods of time. Some of them probably like compressing into a decade or two of things that happened over like a century or more in Western Europe and the United States. You know, you could have enormous differences between young urban, let's say later born urban East Asian people and their parents and grandparents' generations, where the grandparents may be, you know, rural, agrarian, and grew up in extremely poor circumstances, and the later generations may have just like be completely different on all of those domains, and also be very plugged into global youth culture, which is now also sort of more global permeated, which is another huge distinction. So it can make huge differences. Yeah, shoot.
Do you think that, I mean, like with all this technology that we have now, it'll change how we define, like the break-off point for cohorts of generations? Like, will it shrink it? Rather than being between 7 to 10 years, do you think it'll be like 4 or 5 years? Or
So you think like the rate of change would?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. This may be because I'm getting older, but I find myself wondering in some ways that if the rate of technological change, or at least the technological changes that affect society, hasn't actually slowed down some rather than increased. I mean, and please, actually, I really do mean this. Please correct me if you think of more recent examples. I find it difficult to pinpoint things that have happened in the last decade or so that are the same, that feel like the same degree of change as, say, being able to remember, as some of the first older adults I worked with out of graduate school could remember the first automobile that you ever saw. Or to have gone from having to travel on horse or Model T to do any traveling at all, to having jets available to travel worldwide. So you may look, I was in the 80s talking with people who were born at the beginning of the 20th century, so people who within the span of their mostly adult lives had gone from, it might have taken them less time now to go to another country to see their grandchildren than it would have taken them when they were young to have gone across the state. Model A or whatever. It's hard to think of things that had the same social impact as, say, the discovery of the birth control pill.
What did you say, Kara?
The internet is maybe.
One of those things for